Today we're going to create a touchscreen remote control that you can use to control multiple Klipper 3D printers, because why not? I can control all of the printers! Hello everyone, Chris here. Yes, today we're going to have some fun and we're going to create a remote control that you can use to control all of your Klipper-based 3D printers. And that, in my opinion, is one of the coolest things about Klipper. The firmware is great, but having that alternate host like a Raspberry Pi to do all the processing for you enables you to use all of the aspects of that operating system, like this network connectivity. Meaning we can have things like Klipper Screen, like we did a video on for the Voron Trident. We can have that on a different host. We don't have to have it localized directly on the printer. And we can still communicate with all of the other hosts that are connected to the printers. And that's the premise we're going to be using. So we're going to take Klipper Screen, we're going to put it on a Big Tree Tech Pad 5, use that as our touchscreen interface, and I'll show you how to get it all configured. This might be a really cool add-on for anyone's print farm, but it's more of just a fun to do because we can. So let's get into it. I'll show you what we're going to be using to build this whole thing. So here's the Big Tree Tech Pad 5 we're going to be using for this project today. I don't even know if you can still get these. They have them on their site, but they're unavailable. I got this quite a while back for other projects, but it's a really nice touchscreen that's driven by a Raspberry Pi compute module. We'll just take a look at the back. It has a header to install your CMP4. It only works with the Raspberry Pi branded one, by the way. And this one does have a drive on it, so an eMMC. I believe this one is 8 gig. You can get these modules with or without. If you have one with, you don't have to have an SD card. You can just flash it as is. We're going to go through the steps to do that. It is a little bit different. But the screen has a lot of different options on it. Even a spot where you can put a battery so that it remembers over reboots. You know, things like clock time. You really don't need that nowadays if you're connected to the internet, but it is there. We have the full GPIO header, like a Raspberry Pi would, buttons up top to control it. We've got USB ports, one down here, the SD card slot if you do want to add more memory, or you could boot from it if you'd like. HDMI ports, display ports. We've got our power in, this is an OTG port as well, and an Ethernet port. This screen is pretty capable. It will allow you to integrate a lot of different things, a lot of the same things you would with a Raspberry Pi project. But we also have a set of configuration switches down here where we can either use USB or CAN bus via this. So this is more than capable enough to run a 3D printer. You can use it as is, use it as your touchscreen, and your compute module to run Klipper. We're not going to do that today. We're going to get a little fancier with the touchscreen and make this connect up to our printers via the network. But this is what we're going to be using to do that. And while we're here, that's always nice. Now, to power our project, we will need a power supply to be able to charge this battery, but we have this battery so that we can make it a remote control. This is a 400 milliamp 5-volt battery. I just got it off of Amazon, but it has a USB-C plug. It will power this Pi even while it's running some pretty hefty processes for a couple of hours. So more than enough juice here to power our project, to use it as a remote control. And the nice part about this is it's got some ports over here that you can charge the battery while leaving the power up on the Pi. So you've got micro and USB-C. You can charge it up. You don't have to disconnect. I wouldn't use this as some sort of UPS for your Pi projects, but for a remote control, it's going to work more than good enough. And to integrate the whole thing, we've got a case. This is the Big Tree Tech version of the case. It's just a bezel that goes around the screen. It's out there, you can download it, but I wanted to make some sort of case that we could utilize the battery. So I just designed this back that fits on this bezel. We can slide the battery in, still get to all of our ports. I also made a button down here with this little part right here that we can slide in so we can use our battery on and off switch. So this will power it on and off when we need to. It should be able to click the button that's already on the battery. This case might look a little rough. You can see some errors in the extrusion. I was testing a few things while creating this case, so don't blame it on the printer, blame it on me. I even put some spots here for some square nuts so that we can tie the bezel down with some M3 by 10 millimeter screws if we need to, but it's actually a pretty nice snap fit. But before we put everything together, we do need to configure our Raspberry Pi. We'll talk about that just a little bit. We have to flip some switches, but for now, let's go ahead and boot it up so I can show you what's going to be on it if you were to order one of these or have one of these stock. That compute module, a lot of these you can order them with that module and it's already pre-configured with a desktop. So I just plugged the power in. Again, this is what comes on that compute module with the Pad 5 by default. It's a Linux version, Raspberry Pi OS, but it has a desktop installed so that you can already use it as a touchscreen if you want. And this is fine. You could probably even use this to install, but I would rather use a lighter version of the OS and show you how to install it. We don't really need a desktop. Klipper Screen is going to take care of that for us. So we're going to flash the eMMC that's on this compute module with a lighter version, a server-style version that doesn't have this interface on it. So to be able to communicate with that storage that's on the compute module, we need to flip a couple of these dip switches down here. So the bottom one here, we're going to flip that one to on, as well as the second one. These other two stay off. But that will enable us to write to that storage over here via this USB-C port. And you have to use a special type of software to talk to these compute modules. The Raspberry Pi documentation is always really good. All this stuff is out here, what you need to know to communicate with that board, as well as set up things like touchscreens if you're having problems. But we just need the Raspberry Pi boot tool to be able to flash something over to this CM4. So we'll just scroll down to the section for the Windows installer, and we can grab that right here. We'll download it. We can head to Downloads, and this will install our Pi boot. This will allow us to use the CM4 as a device on our computer like we would an SD card. This is a pretty well-known app, so I'm not really worried about it. I'm going to run anyway. I already have mine installed, so it's going to want me to uninstall it and install this version, but I'm just going to do it to show you. It's just a few click buttons. We go through setup. It's going to give you the GUN license, hit next, and install in the default location. You're going to see this screen. It's going to install a few drivers to enable us to talk to that CM4. It takes just a minute. Once that RPi boot install is complete, I'm just going to plug the screen in with that module installed into the computer with that USB-C port. Our install is complete, and we can finish. Now that that's done, we can just start our RPi boot tool. Here it is in the menu. We'll just click on it, and it's going to open up this window and start communicating with that module now that we have it plugged in. You have to do this every time you unplug and replug this module. When that window closes, you're going to probably see some errors if you're on Windows because this is a Linux style file system, but you can see that we have this as a drive now. If we reopen File Explorer, you can see the boot file system, D, and then F, the readable file system from the Windows side that we could use. But none of that matters because we're going to use the Raspberry Pi Imager tool to overwrite this with a lighter version of OS. Here's our Raspberry Pi imaging tool. Nowadays, on the newer versions, you can actually choose a device if you'd like. We don't need any filtering for the CM4. We can choose OS, and we're just going to choose a light version of Raspberry Pi OS. So let's go to Other, and we're going to do this one right here, Raspberry Pi OS Lite 64-bit. A lot smaller image, a lot easier to run. And then choose storage. Now that we ran that RPi boot, you're going to be able to see that CM4 module through the screen. It's a 32 gig. I thought it was an 8 gig for some reason. It's a 32 gig module. So there you go. And we'll hit next. And then we can edit the customized settings for this. It is a Raspberry Pi just like anything else. So we can edit settings. We're just going to call this device Pad 5. And we want to make sure that we have SSH enabled. On the newer version, it has it on a different screen. We'll look at it here in a second, but set the username and password for SSH. Pi and Raspberry is what I usually set it to. That's default. And make sure you enter your correct wireless information so that we can log into it. Remember, those are case sensitive for your Wi-Fi name and password. And you can set up your location. I set mine to Central Time. Services, we're going to use password authentication for SSH. But make sure this is ticked or we won't be able to log in with our putty tool to do the configuration part. Options is just what you would like to do after the image is written, eject it, all that good stuff. So we'll just hit save. And now we can tell it to go ahead and write to our CM4. It will be erased. Remember, everything on this will be erased. So yes. When the image flashing over the CM4 is complete, you're going to get this message. You can just go ahead and hit continue, and that will release the CM4 from the computer. So we can unplug it for now, and we can flip these dip switches back over to where they need to be. We'll turn 1 and 2 back to off. So now all 4 are off. It should be able to go ahead and boot from what we just wrote to it because it already has all the information, and it will join our Wi-Fi because it has that info as well. So now we'll just plug it into our power supply and let it boot up. We have powered on. You can see the lights over here telling us that it's active, it's reading, it has wireless connectivity, but we don't have any touch screen yet. That's because we installed the light version, and you actually have to have a few more drivers to be able to use a screen with this configuration. So we're going to have to log in and run some commands. Big Tree Tech does have a guide out there on their GitHub for this screen, but I found some of the commands weren't quite right. It might be a good place to start, but I've actually had to update a few things to be able to get some of this stuff to work. So I'll leave a link to this, but it might not be 100% correct. You will need to know the IP address of your Pad 5 after it comes up to be able to log into it. I just go to my router and get mine. Mine's at 1.48. You might be able to get lucky and use that host name you created with the Imager tool. So try pad5.local. That's what we named it here. But whatever you named it, give it a .local and see if that will let you in. But now we're going to go use the putty tool. So we'll just punch in the IP so we can connect up. Since we enabled SSH, we're able to log in and use that username and password we set. Again, I just use Pi and Raspberry. So to get the screen to work, we need to tackle that first to make sure a touch screen is going to be available, and then we'll jump to Klipper Screen. But we need to install that driver. And we can just pull that from the web because Raspberry Pi has a great repository for all these drivers out there. There's a whole site called Raspberry Pi Datasheets. There's a lot of great information out here as well as drivers we need to use. If you scroll down and look through some of these, the one we actually need is this one right here. DTBlob disp1 display1 cam1.bin. So we're going to pull that using a web-git from putty down to the screen and put it in a location where it will pick it up on boot. So we're going to do sudo to get to root level. We'll have to have that password. It's the same as we used to log in. And then we're going to use a wget, a web-git, and go to that site, datasheets raspberrypi.com. It's in folder CMIO, and then we need that dtblob disp cam1.bin. And then we're going to copy it to a location when we download it. And this location here, boot / the bin name that we need, dtblob.bin, that will allow it to use it. And this is the command they provide for you in the Big Tree Tech manual. But I found with the version of Raspberry Pi OS that I'm using, you actually have to put this in /boot /firmware for it to work. So I'm just going to update this command to firmware /. That way it's going to put it in the correct directory, and then when it boots up, it'll be able to grab it and start our touch screen. So we'll just hit it, it's going to download it, put it in the proper directory, and we should be good. Now we can just go ahead and reboot. Sudo reboot. When it's coming back up, if you get that multicolored test, that's a good sign. It's initialized the screen, and now we can see the SSH messages. Now we're upside down in this fashion just because the power plug's over here. We could rotate that if we wanted to. I show that in the Klipper Screen video if that's something you want to do. But we know the screen is working, so we're in really good shape. Now all we have to do is tackle Klipper Screen. So before we do that, let's go ahead and tackle putting our case back on, but I want to shut it down gracefully. So I'm just going to log back in real quick, and I'm going to run a sudo command, sudo shutdown -h for halt. And we'll just add a now, so it does it right now. That way we don't risk corrupting the file system by just unplugging it. So now it's shut down, we can just remove the power, And the case and battery install are very straightforward. The bezel that Big Tree Tech has created for you has all the spots so that you can use the switches as well as the GPIO pins, and it just fits over the top of the Pad 5, just like this. And it snaps in place. It's a pretty nice fit. The part that I added was the back. So this just snaps on here and it allows for all these different components, but it also allows for the battery that I selected. So the battery pack, it's just got this USB-C wire on it, but it also has some lights to give you a status of how charged it is or if it's on. And it has a little bitty button here. One press to turn it on, you're going to get one light. Two presses to turn it off. And in the case that I made, it just slides right in there. It is a very tight fit. I made some holes on the bottom. If you want to get it back out, you can use one of your screwdrivers or whatever just to push it up. And there's also, you saw in that window there, you could always just use something to touch that button to power it on and power it off. But I made a little button that you can press. So you can just drop this in there. Might need a pair of pliers to get it seated. But once it's seated, it's just going to be flush with the bottom of the case. And when you put your battery in, it'll be able to touch that tiny little button. You can see the lights in the window there, but it's just a very satisfying quick press. One press, battery on. Two presses, battery off. So hopefully this is useful. I don't know if we could expand it out to a larger screen if they don't make Pi 5 anymore or Pad 5 screen anymore, but we'll see. And the whole thing just snaps on the back of that bezel, just like that. Again, you can use some M3 by 10 millimeter screws and some square nuts if you need it, but it's a pretty good fit. And now that that's on there, you can just plug your battery in to power up your screen on the go. And we can use it as a remote control. So just hit it once, and that will power it on. Now with the screen, you can use this in whatever orientation you'd like. I kind of like having the power and the battery down here at the bottom and the buttons on top, but you could always go in and flip that screen. It's just a couple of things you have to update. But as a remote, either orientation are going to work pretty good. So up until this point, we've just got our screen working on our compute module. We have a lighter version of the OS, so we give it every opportunity to run as best as it can. Also, we installed it on our case and we have our cool little battery pack. Now from here, you could definitely go ahead and plug in your printer and use it to start serving G-code to your Klipper board, whatever main board you might have. But you don't have to do that just to control a printer that's already running Klipper. You can install Klipper Screen as a standalone. You don't have to have Klipper installed. And that's what we're going to do next using the Kiauh tool. But again, you can configure this however you want. And we're going to configure it with Kiauh and Klipper Screen to control multiple printers, so we can just walk around and control whatever we'd like. And I've showed the Kiauh install multiple times on different videos, and it's very straightforward. All we have to do is make sure you're in the home directory, and then we're going to do a git clone to download it from GitHub. It's the kiauh.git file. We'll let that download. If it does do this command here where command not found, that means you don't have git. So you can just do sudo apt install git. It's a really quick install. Now you have it. Now you can do your git clone. Just a side tip. Kiauh is there. Now we can just run the Kiauh menu. So we'll do /Kiauh. That's the directory, and then we'll run the Kiauh script. .sh. And we'll do 1 to install. And then we're only interested in Klipper Screen, so we're going to do a 5. Since we don't have anything else installed, it's a very light version. It's going to go through and install a bunch of stuff, so it might take a minute. As we get through the install, we will have some questions. Install as service, yes. We want to make sure that it can boot and do all the things it needs. And then when it's done, you'll go back to the menu. You can hit back, and then Q to quit. That should be all there is to it for the Klipper Screen install. We still have to configure printers. But you can see we've already got our Klipper Screen available on our remote. It's just waiting to connect to a machine. We're going to take care of that next. So now all we have to do is configure Klipper Screen to be able to talk to multiple printers. Now you would traditionally use this configuration. You'd configure this Klipper Screen config file through Mainsail or Fluid. We don't have that because we don't have a local install on our Pad 5. But we can still configure the config file, we just have to do it command line. So that's what we're going to do. It's just a couple of quick entries if you have Klipper machines already, but it's easier to configure it in the default location where Klipper Screen would normally look for it. And that's in your printer data config section. So let's just make a couple of directories here in home. So if you do an ls real quick, you can see we have Klipper Screen, but we need to do a make dir, mkdir, printer underscore data. And we can cd into that. Inside that, we need to make a directory, mkdir, called config. Inside your config, we'll just cd into it. Inside here is where printer.cfg and things like klipperscreen.conf would be. So we're just going to create that Klipper Screen configuration here. And it is case sensitive, remember that. So we're just going to do sudo nano capital K Klipper capital S screen dot conf. And so we just have a blank file to configure our screen, the multiple printers. You don't have to get fancy in here, we just need a couple of things. You have to have a main statement. So in brackets, bracket, main, bracket. Then we can start configuring printers. So in brackets, do printer, and then whatever you'd like to name this printer on the screen. So our first one, let's do Trident. And we'll close the bracket. Now all we need is an IP and a port. That's the port and IP where Moonraker exists. Again, I'm assuming these already run Klipper and they're up and running. But do Moonraker underscore host colon and then the IP of that Pi that you're running Klipper on. This one is 192.168.1.32. And that IP, if you're confused, here's the Mainsail window for my Trident printer. I'm just using the IP that I go to get to this screen. You can use the host name if it works. You can use it in here. Just remember, if it's a local host name, you need to use .local in here. But that's going to get to the printer, and then you need the Moonraker port. Moonraker underscore port, colon, and the default port, that's 7125. You could change it on your configuration. It might be different. I don't know why you would, but it's going to work for almost all the configurations out there. So now we can talk to one printer. Let's add a couple more. We can just highlight, and here in Putty, you can right-click to paste. And we don't have to change up much, really. So we're just going to call it another printer name. Let's add our Ender 3v2 that runs Klipper. So we'll do E3v2, and we just need to update the IP. That one runs at 1.26. And we'll copy it again. Let's control our skgo. skgo, and it is at 1.45. And I'm just getting these IPs by navigating to the Mainsail or Fluid window. And let's do one more. Let's let it control our KLP1. And that one is at 1.41. So we have 4 printers that the screen can now control. So we'll just control X, Y, enter to save. And I would recommend just doing a sudo reboot to let the screen pick up the new configurations. And when our new remote control comes up, we now have all 4 of our printers. We can just pick which one we'd like to control. How about Trident, since it's here on the table with us? We can see it over here in all of its glory. We can take our remote here. Let's just go to Move and tell it to Auto Home. Home all. And it starts to move. We have lots of power in our hands. Now we can control all the printers. Over here on the printer shelf, we'll just go back. And let's do the Ender 3. We can home it. It's moving. We'll go back. How about the SK Go? We'll home it. It's doing its thing. And the KLP1. It's doing its thing. And you can see how handy this could be if you had multiple printers. You could build a bigger one of these, mount it someplace on the wall. You don't have to go to all these different pies or screens. This could be a handy little tool. I expect to see more of these in other people's hands very soon. So there you go, all that awesome 3D printer power right in the palm of your hand. And again, this was just for fun, but it does showcase just how powerful it can be to run that Raspberry Pi or the alternate host alongside your Klipper install. The possibilities are pretty much limitless as far as what you can integrate and the cool projects that you can create. And again, I do look to seeing a few of these out there, maybe even a wall mount solution, which would be pretty awesome. So, hopefully you found this helpful. That's it for today, and I'll see you really soon on the next one.